Good morning, everybody. Welcome. Happy Saturday. If you're running your business, you are effectively self-employed. You're your own boss. You give yourself tellings off. You give yourself praise. You do everything here. What we're going to talk about today is if you are self-employed, what sort of business structure should you have? So we're going to talk about that in the show. We're going to go through the options, the decisions, how you decide. We're going to treat also in the show later on in the second part of the show. I'm delighted to welcome our first guest, the Shine the Spotlight, with Richard Walker here. Some of you may know him, some of you may not. You'll get to hear more about him towards the end of the show here. So Richard at the moment is dining on M&Ms and virtual G&T in the morning, and we're going to bring him on to see the spotlight, what it's like running your own business, where he's come from, and in terms of how he feels and the highs and lows of running his own business. So my name is Mahmood. I'm going to be giving you a bit of an overview presentation on what we call business structure here. How do we decide? How do we know what's best for our business? And we're going to lay the foundations today. And next week, you've got something to look forward to. We're going to talk about that wonderful thing that nobody can actually avoid. The two inevitable things in life that you can't avoid. One, you will die at some point. Sorry to be a bearer of bad news. And secondly, you will pay taxes. So we're going to have a look at those structures in more details next week. But without further ado, let's see what we're going to be discussing today. So the whole idea is about business structure. And what I want us to go through is the following. So by the magic of my wonderful PowerPoint, let's get that annoying little mouse out of the way. If it works, talk amongst yourselves for a second or two. A little bit of technical Netflix panic there. Let's have a look. There we go. Now that wonderful arrow comes up. So we're going to look at three things. So we're talking about self-employment, and I briefly mentioned this idea of self-employment. So we're talking about self-employment fundamentally refers to anybody who is their own boss. We're going to look at the options and the factors that we take into account for making that decision. And a bit of a spoiler alert here, you can have a variety of business structures depending on what your business activity and your business empire is made up of. And then we're going to finally look at the different options we've got to actually select from. Now, usual thing, Q&A, if you've got any questions that pop up. Those of you, welcome everyone who's listening to the recording on this one here. And let's get a little bit more detail. Now, does it matter? Well, most decisions we make in our businesses matter, and it matters for a number of reasons. And the structure, and if you're sitting at home thinking, what does he mean by structure? If you've heard the phrases company, if you've heard the phrases partnerships, if you've heard this idea of a sole trader, a joint venture, a charity, those are all typically business structures. Why does it make a difference? Well, it affects what records you need to keep. So at the end of each year, typically, we know we've got to have that conversation with our tax man, our woman, and therefore they want to have a look at the accounts and they want to decide how much tax you've got to pay. What you've got to keep within your organization typically is influenced by the type of business structure that you decide is best for you. Probably one of the biggest influencing factors about the type of structure is if something goes wrong, either on a personal front, a business front, you may be in the spotlight, you may be exposed to any potential risk. So obviously, quite naturally, we want to protect ourselves from that. So therefore, if the business loses, if we're actually engaged with any activity, that's going to influence the type of structure that we have. Can't get away from it. Tax is obviously a big influencing criteria for the type of business structure. And I'll share with you the magic number that determines whether it's viable to be a company or whether it's viable to not be a company. Getting hold of money. Now, if you don't need money from anybody else, if your business can grow using your own personal funds, which may or may not be a good idea, then you can ignore this point. If raising money at some point in the future is relevant, believe it or not, type of business structure is going to have a big impact. Last couple of things, again, all of that money for yourself, obviously legally speaking, is going to be influenced by the type of business structure that you actually do have. There are certain opportunities not available to certain types of business structures that will be available to others. And lastly, structure, decision making. Again, all those will be influenced by the type of structure that you adopt. Let's have a pause and let's see what's coming next. So here's the options we've got. Now, first of all, for me, fundamentally, it comes down to, first of all, the type of business that you actually have. Now, we're talking about inherent risk. So let's assume that your business is involved in construction. Let's assume that your business is employs staff. Let's assume that you engage in an industry where there are operational and real risks. Well, if something goes wrong, so you're in construction, and let's say you lay the wrong foundations, you put the wrong bricks in, somebody wires up something incorrectly, accidentally or otherwise, and something goes wrong, you're in the frame potentially, and you want to protect yourself against any legal consequences. It may be that you have staff, and we all know if we want to grow, we need people to help manage that growth here, but we're responsible for things that our staff do, our team do. So again, we may wish to protect ourselves against that. Industry as well. Certain sectors will stipulate and mandate that if they're going to do business with you, that you have to be a particular type of structure. Now, what's it going to impact on? It's a bit of a repetition here, but I think it's worthwhile repeating what that's going to be. So again, this is pretty much what we talked about at the beginning: record keeping, exposure. And your head's probably thinking, my God, there's so much to choose here. And these things in life typically tend to be like a seesaw, where we've got the pluses, we've got the minuses, and then we have to make a decision what's commercially best and what's financially best itself. What I will say to you is, it's possible you may have different structures at different points in your business cycle. So let's get on with it. What's the first one that we can have? I think I'm going to invest in a clicker next week. That might be quite good. Now, this for me is probably the one that most businesses will start with. So let's have a look at the first one. So let's get them all on the screen so we don't. There. Look at that. Isn't that wonderful? So 3 things. Now, a sole trader is as it implies. You're an individual. So you've got your business on one side, but the structure is it's you. You're a sole trader. Typically, it's very simple because there's no legalities, there's no paperwork to comply with. The only compliance is really that you've got to register with the tax authorities to get going. Apart from that, you don't need to register anything. There's no legal paperwork as such, and that's great. Now, bear in mind, by the way, sole trader doesn't mean micro, doesn't mean you're a small business. I've known sole traders, myself included, that employ staff, have major contracts, have a reasonable level of turnover, and they prefer to have that structure for them. It suits their purposes. Also, the downside is the risk. Now, in accounting terms, the numbers that we record, the accounts that we do those for the business. But not wishing to be a pessimist here, if something does go wrong, let's say you've got a contract with a customer, it's a big contract, you're really excited, and unfortunately the customer pulls out, but you've ordered lots of supplies, lots of materials, you paid out costs already. Well, you might have a challenge paying those supplier bills. Well, you're responsible for those bills. If something goes wrong in your business, if it all goes messy, and it does happen, failures do happen in life. If it all goes wrong, you are personally responsible for that. And that means if you've got a house, if you've got assets, you've got money in the bank, potentially that's at risk from being seized by anyone who might be suing you. If you commit an accident or something happens, I don't mean in your pants, obviously, if something goes wrong, then what that means is that you personally are liable for those consequences there as well. Now, you might be thinking, well, insurance surely, Mahmood, covers that. Insurance covers up to a certain point, but it may not cover the whole shooting match. And liability is unlimited. So even though it's got your business name on the invoice, you individually are responsible. Other things to bear in mind, you have more anonymity as a sole trader. There's no public disclosure. You don't have to publish accounts and keep them on a public register. Effectively, there's that anonymity that goes with it. Now, for me, the next time, and this is probably a bit of a hybrid, by the way. So sometimes in life, we think, do you know what? I like operating by myself, but actually it'd be useful to have somebody that comes on board that actually supports me and works with me. Not necessarily as an employee, not necessarily as an outside contractor, but actually a partner. It's like, we're in this together. Typically, they're quite common in husband and wife situations. They're quite common in family situations, where a family will pull together. And they're quite common here with friends, and I'll give you my own take on that as well. Now, fundamentally for me, a partnership in Format Strike is lots of individual sole traders basically glued together. So what that means is it's got the features of sole trader. That's still there. So you've got that collective responsibility. Some of the upside is, though, that you may have somebody who's very skilled at marketing. You may have somebody who's very skilled at delivering the work. You may have somebody who's very skilled, at other disciplines. So you might say, do you know what? Instead of taking that person on as an employee, why don't we put our heads together? Why don't we pool our talent? And why don't we collectively go after that business and grow it together? You've got strengths. I've got strengths. Together, we're a real great combination here. And that's fantastic. What that also means is if things are such that you need to take some time away from the business, if you need to relax, if there is such a thing in running your own business, then your partner can potentially step in to support you. Also, there's contribution of funds. So businesses need money. So individual partners may put money into the pot. Now, the risk is we know partners should support each other. Without wishing to make any comment on anybody's personal relationships here, I have seen partnerships work very successfully. And unfortunately, I've seen partnerships actually fracture and work very negatively as well. Typically, it's normally when the business grows, and it's typically when the business starts making money. And when money gets into the equation, it's amazing how relationships can potentially become quite skewed. So you've got the idea that you can spread the liability, you can spread the risk, you can support each other. That's great. In terms of the downside, though, if one partner is a little bit on the reckless side, if they make bad decisions and they engage into contracts and agree to do things, all of you are collectively bound by that decision. So you can engage with one partner who goes out, does everything. They might not think through what they're doing. They may enter into a contract which is going to cost you a lot of money. Well, you might then look at it in a cold light of day and say, that's real bad news. Tough. You're all bound by that. One thing I would certainly say, if you're going into partnership, 2 or 3 things I would suggest as a takeout. Number one, get an agreement. So get something, even if it's a very simple document that regulates what you're going to be doing, who does what. Make sure you've got transparency in this arrangement, not just on what you're doing, but actually keeping records, and effectively decide what happens when you start making money. Who gets what? Is it equal? Is it shared? Get those challenging conversations done at the beginning. Don't do them once the partnership has commenced there as well. And as a small heads up, it's purely a personal opinion. As a general rule, partnerships with brothers and sisters, brackets, friends, tend not to work. Okay, or they tend to be harder, shall we say, because you've got to separate your friendship and family life from that business. And that's not always the easiest things. If you remember trying to tell your friends, when they've done something wrong, or your siblings or whatever, that's not always the easiest conversation in the world to conduct. But I have seen them very successful. Now, the last format really to conjure up is this idea of a company. Now, if you're listening from overseas, welcome to you. You might call them what they call corporate or LLCs. We call them something else in the UK. One of the biggest factors why people choose company routes, and by company, it means as follows. So you've got a business. I'm going to mention it just briefly. Richard's going to come on in the afternoon, hopefully before that. He's going to come on in a few moments. Now, he runs a business. He's his own boss. He works very hard. He's self-employed. He's decided, potentially, or not potentially, to actually run his business through a company. So there's he. That's who the clients see. But the actual business is running through a company. And he will have a company name. He can introduce that himself later on. And it will have the letters LTD. He won't have the letters PLC yet, by the way. He might go on the stock exchange in a few years' time. He may have the letters LLC if he's overseas, or Inc. if you're in Europe. So that's the company. It reduces the risk. So it's the company, this thing, that enters into the contract. So it's got a completely separate legal as well as business identity. It's the thing, this artificial body that's created, that enters into the contracts, that is responsible for anything that goes wrong. What that means is, by the way, is that if his company or any company gets into a contract with a client and that client doesn't pay, there are ways to mitigate that. It's between those two artificial things. So if the companies don't have any money, you're screwed, basically. But there are ways to get around that. So what that means is if Richard decides to retire to the Caribbean in a few years' time, unless he gets rid of it, the company is still there. As we said, enter contracts in your own name. And remuneration. There is an advantage to companies that, you know, you can say, well, actually, there's a tax advantage. So companies pay normally typically a lower rate than individuals, but the challenge is taking the money out of the company. Now, I'm just going to mention that in passing today because we're going to get down and dirty next week, and we're going to talk about taxes between these different business structures there as well. So you've got more flexibility, you've got more options for remunerating yourself, which you should do as a business owner through a company compared to being a sole trader. Now, I'm just going to show you all the different types here. I'm going to share a couple of tips with you, and I think I can see Richard Agent getting quite impatient with us now, and we're going to move on to bring him on in a few moments. So as a snapshot, this is not an exclusive list, but it's a pretty comprehensive one. There's all the different names that you might have come across for types of business structure. Sole trader we've talked about. So it's that low cost, low entry point. You've got a partnership, which is just a collection. You've got a limited company. Now, notice I've mentioned two types here. So you've got a private company. You own it. It's all yours. You're the one you have board meetings with. That's got shares. You happen to own those shares, maybe with yourself or other people. Not for profit. So if you've got effectively any money that you make stays within the company, there's a different type of limited company for that. Franchise, you know, these big chains like McDonald's, Pizza Hut, KFC, they're pretty much franchise operations. So you buy the ability, the products, everything else from these companies, but you pay them a big fee or a small fee. It's normally a big fee. And effectively you run it as a self-employed individual, but it's their marketing, their processes, but it's a quick route in, but you know, it can be quite expensive. And unincorporated, basically, if you're a club, association, or a charity, that option is open to you. What I would certainly say as a flavor to take away is it depends on the stage of your business cycle. So typically, I would normally advise you might start life as a sole trader, unless there are compelling reasons not to do so, and evolve into a company. You can incorporate at any point. The touch point to share with you before we leave this slide is around about £40,000 a year profits, plus that from a purely numbers point of view, that's the critical point where it becomes much more advantageous to become a company compared to an individual. However, more of that to be revealed next week. So what I'd like us to do, everyone, good to know. But before we get back to that good to know, I'm just going to now go to our green room, see if he's not fallen asleep, and let's bring on our next guest. Mr. Richard Walker, good morning to you, sir.
Good morning, Mahmood. How are you?
How are you? I'm very good, Richard. So, Richard, thank you for your patience in the green room. Have they been looking after you okay?
Yeah, been all right, thank you.
Okay. Now, Richard, fantastic. Listen, I really appreciate you sparing the time this morning, away from your jet skiing and everything else, to come on the show. So, would you like to share with your viewers, give us something a little bit about your background, Richard, what you do?
Okay. So, WeldMax is a welding supply store, and we supply welding equipment, consumables, abrasives, PPE to the industry. We also do calibrations for ISO 900 machines. We do service and repair. And we've also got a trade counter that we run from our Starport Worcestershire base. and we service at the industry our sort of customer bases within a 20-25 mile radius. But anything further afield than that, we just use couriers to sort of send products out overnight. Now, I started this business.
And how long have you been in business for now, Richard?
3 years. We've just coming up to our 3rd anniversary. So started.
Okay, congratulations.
Thank you. I started literally on my own with a van with some stock after doing 20 odd years plus in this manufacturing fabrication industry that I've been involved with. And I'd worked for a couple of manufacturers and a few distributors to sort of get my knowledge and my experience of the industry over a long period of time. But what I saw was there was different things that I could do to do things slightly differently, have a little bit of a different approach, have more control. I was trying to source products that I thought were reliable, that were good, and we looked at ways of being able to evaluate and get products that we could sell with confidence. And selling with confidence has resulted in the success that we're having so far, to be honest.
Richard, let me ask you. So, what was it that? So, in your pre the company starting itself,
Yep.
What was? How many years had you been working for yourself? What was the driver for you? The thoughts about why you wanted to start working for yourself?
Okay, so when I worked for different companies, I've only worked for a small number of different companies.
Okay.
There was little issues that I found along the way where I'm business to business, so I'm the front-facing person with the customer, and there was little issues that were cropping up that were, didn't need to happen. And I thought, well, I can do things a little bit differently here, and I could be more reliable and more secure with the customer, and resolve little things that would make a better service. And service is key in this industry. So
were you getting a little bit frustrated then, a bit that you thought you could do things a little bit better than you saw yourself?
Yeah, a little bit. And, I thought there's a different way of doing it. And you've got to do something a little different rather than just copycat to give you that
for sure.
An edge. And I just thought, I'm going to give it a go. After a long, long time of, there's nothing, the way that I came along this path of my career has stood me well. My knowledge is broad because of that. But I just thought it's time for me to give this a go. I'm sure I can do it. And here we are now.
And do you have much within your friends and your colleagues? Are many of them self-employed?
There is actually a number. It seems to be. As time goes by and as you get a little bit older, people do sort of take the plunge into the self-employment and running their own businesses. And there are benefits to it. There's harder work to be done. But
for sure.
Yeah, people seem to like it. That friends of ours that do it, seems to be doing okay.
So cast your mind back that 3 years there. Do you remember what it felt like before you took that final plunge and plunged into it?
I'm pretty strong-minded, to be honest. So, once I'd made that decision, I just jumped into the bucket, as I call it.
Okay, I like that.
It was hard work, don't get me wrong. The first few months, I literally was looking at my business.
Yeah.
I was just trying to get through month by month, survive, keep the business alive month by month. And I'd say, to be honest, the first 6 months to nearly 12 months, that's what it was like. Making sure I was turning over enough business and I got enough cash flow rolling to get month by month results. And then after about the first year, it just seemed to turn and it got a little bit easier. You get a bit more confidence. You learn to take bigger and better decisions. And it just seems to get easier and roll along. And then you can start building your little foundations and your Lego blocks to the next step in your business, really. So
that's an interesting way you put that. So are there things, if you look back at your time and, experience counts a lot for more than sort of practical form, pretending what we know is going on. What would you have advised the Richard Walker at the beginning to have done different, if anything at all, compared to where you are now?
Differently. Well, you never know what's going to happen. So a little bit of contingency would have helped. I literally was, like I say, living month to month to keep it all going. I was lucky that I was in a position to be able to do that. If I was younger, if I'd have done this when I was younger, and you got family with more commitment and your mortgages to pay and things, it is harder because you've got responsibilities. It's all about hard work. You've got to be prepared to work 24/7 at times, and you've got to roll your sleeves up and get on with it.
Now, I've always known you as a sort of a good hard worker, not prepared to sweat. You're quite happy to sweat, put that effort in, and apply yourself there. Would you say that you're quite strong-willed as well, quite self-motivated?
I am, yeah. You've got to be, yeah, because you're going to have ups and downs. Once you jump on the bicycle of business, you've got to keep pedaling. Now you could be going uphill, downhill on a nice long straight road with the sun shining, but it's going to rain. So you've got to be able to, as I put it, roll your sleeves up, take the rough with the smooth, and get on with it. There's always a solution. That's my sort of philosophy. That whenever you do get difficult times, and it might not be financially, it just might be the way that you're just bogged down with. At the time when I started, I was one person trying to do it all on my own. So there's always a solution to something. So just sit down, think about it, make your decisions, and stick to them.
Well, I think that's a great point. I think, in most things that we come across, even if you hit a roadblock or a challenge, if you breathe, take a step back, there's always options. There's always different ways of doing that. Do you think that the business has changed you much, Richard, in terms of how you approach things now, 3 years on? Definitely.
Yeah. I wouldn't have done something like this 3 years ago. I wouldn't have had the confidence, to be sure. I might have I'd have been very nervous doing something like this 3 years ago. Whereas now, this is me. This is what I am. This is what I do. I love doing what I do. So I've got more confidence than I had before. I'm willing to do more things. I'm more diverse. This is my little baby, to be honest, this business. So, and where it's going to end up, I don't know. But, I've got a plan, and I'll just keep growing and growing nice and steadily. You sort of tend to know when it's the right time to take another jump and the next step. And when it's not right, and you've got to hold back and just wait that little bit longer. But yeah, it does change you.
And that's interesting. I like that way that you're thinking in terms of, as your business, your baby develops, you've got milestones, you've got the next platform, you've got the next iteration here. Have you seen any change? As I said, Richard, I know you work hard. I know you've got a great vision. I know you're brilliant in what you do here. And I think a lot of people who may not be used to the world of business, not used to the idea of self-employed, they can sometimes get a perception of what it must be like to be self-employed. So have you found that the reaction from your friends, colleagues over the last 3 years have changed to you?
Not really. No, I mean, if you've got good friends, they're very supportive. So
very much so.
Yeah. And I have got a lot of friends that do run their own businesses, that are in their own little ventures. So it's good to be able to chat to each other about things like that.
And do you find that you've got shared experiences amongst those colleagues of yours as well, your friends?
Yeah, definitely. You can share advice, can't you, as you go along? Because
very much so.
There are parts of running a business that with like accountancy that you help us with. That's we all have to do that, and we all can help each other out with advice and things that some people might do differently to us.
So, Richard, if you don't mind me asking you then, so I'm going to put you on a spot here a little bit. If you had somebody, maybe not necessarily doing exactly what you do, but as a new business here, would there be one tip that you would share with them to say, look, okay, if you want to become a successful business, however you define that, what's the one tip you would share with them?
Well, we listen to our customers. Our customers are key to us. So a lot of our business is done off the service and the support that we offer and the backup that we do. So that really would be, treat everybody how you want to be treated, look after your customers, listen carefully, and offer them the backup and support, because that would stand you really good ground for the future. You've only got to help somebody out once with something that they're stuck with. They'll remember that. As soon as you let somebody down, they'll remember that. So
yeah, very much so.
Yeah, you've got to do that extra bit for them.
Yeah, and I think you're right, because I think people tend to remember how somebody makes them feel very strongly, and that stays with them as well. And obviously your business, like most businesses, are built on customer service here. Is there one thing you'd tell people to try and avoid? You know, something that look. I've made massive mistakes in my business career. It's still going. I've made massive flap ups. I've made successes, and I'll probably continue carrying on making mistakes there as well. It's a human condition. Is there a mistake that you might have made yourself? You don't have to give us the detail. That you think actually, if I had done that beforehand, it may have lessened the chance of it going wrong.
I think we've been quite lucky not to make any catastrophe mistakes.
Okay.
There's an element of pressure that can build up when you're getting busy or you're getting a bit anxious because you need to be busier. So you need to be able to, look after that pressure and control that pressure so it doesn't get on top of you. And every now and then you do need to take time out. Although I sort of joke with colleagues and with yourself, Mahmood, and I say I'm 24/7. I'm not. I do like to turn it off, especially on the weekend. I mean, this is a one-off. This is.
Don't worry, we won't make it a regular thing, dragging you when you're having time off. So, what does Richard Walker do to relax and unwind?
This is my hobby. So the hobby side of it, playing the golf and whatever sort of disappeared. But I've got 2 children, young family, so we like to go out and do whatever, and especially when it's sunny like this, it's great, isn't it? Make the most of your weekends.
For sure. And I think you're right there, Richard. I think most business owners, if they're absolutely honest, hopefully my wife isn't listening either, it's very difficult to say, I run my business 9 to 5 and the rest of it is, I'm not even thinking about it, because we think, well, for me, you think about your business even when the hours are shut, even when you haven't got customers to serve. It's a continual activity, which can be good for some, stress on others, but you're quite right. You do need to have a little time where you think, actually, I'm not going to completely divorce myself. I'm going to separate myself away from the business, but it's difficult. And Richard, I'd just like to say thank you very much for appearing on the program. We're going to publish some notes afterwards. So what's the places that you like to hang out in the virtual world? So if somebody wants to find more about Richard Walker and find out more about welding products, which I haven't got a clue about, where would they find you?
Okay, so we've got obviously a website, but we do have a Facebook page, and we've also on Instagram as well. And we if you private message, direct message, we always respond to the messages that we get through the multimedia. I'm not the best personally, I'm lucky that I have got staff that do better things than me. So, that side of it's sort of left to them. But we're on Instagram and Facebook. That's the main, at the moment, that's the main portals that we're using.
Perfect. And I suppose one last question, Richard, before we say goodbye. What would be the song? You didn't even know I was going to ask you this question. What would be the song that you'd like people to associate with Richard Walker?
No, that's putting me on the spot, isn't it?
Yeah, I thought I'd come up with just a curveball there at you, Richard.
Wow. I don't know. Tina Turner, Simply the Best. That will do, won't it?
I think that's fantastic. Richard, listen, thanks very much. I'm just going to, do you mind me sharing the world, showing your supporting partner in all of this? If Lucy's okay, I'm just going to show on the screen. So Lucy, say hello. I don't think this is actually in the ride or anything, but here we go. Yeah, there's your wonderful wife, Lucy, who I think does a stunning job. So Richard, this is your chance to get some brownie points to mention Lucy briefly about what a wonderful job she does in your business.
Yeah, I mean, Lucy's been with us now for 18 months, and the business has really took off since Lucy's come in. She takes control of the office. She does what she does, and it leaves me to be able to do whatever I got to do and keep the ball rolling. So without Lucy, I wouldn't be where I am now. So
fantastic. That was very well said there, Richard. So I think the reason I want to bring Lucy on, most businesses, you can deliver what you do. You've got great value that you deliver, but you need somewhere a support type team to actually help you with the other aspects. So it's not just the delivery, it's all those other aspects as well. And I've shown you loads of brownie points as well, Richard. So listen, have a great weekend. Thank you very much for coming on the show. You've been a delight, and have a great weekend.
Thank you, Mahmood. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, Richard. Bye-bye, Lucy. Now, everybody, that was great. So thank you very much for your time. Next week's show, we're going to talk a bit more about business structure and taxes, which is obviously what you're waiting for. We're going to have another guest on our show for next week. Hope you like it. Share it. Richard, our guest, brilliant. So this is Mahmood, just showing you our last thing. Good to know. If you want to find out more about what we're up to, we got a podcast called I Hate Numbers, which is a fantastic thing. So everyone, have a great weekend. This is me, Mahmood, signing out. It's over.